The stories we've heard are ones of personal sacrifice and a lifelong dedication.
Something happened at 5:47 that morning that no one saw coming. Prince William made a decision so shocking, so devastating, that even hardened palace staff stood frozen in disbelief. This was not just another royal drama. This was the moment a family exploded beyond repair.
I have also learned something that troubles me deeply.
What William discovered about Meghan was so disturbing that he had no choice but to act. The leaked documents, the secret recordings, the truth they have been hiding from you. By the end of this video, you will never look at the royal family the same way again. Prince William had been awake for hours. According to those close to the situation, he had spent much of the night walking through the palace, moving from room to room as if the weight of what he was about to do required physical motion to process. This was not a decision made in haste or anger. Reports suggest that the statement he was preparing to release had been revised multiple times, with each version becoming more direct and less diplomatic than the last. The careful language that typically characterizes royal communications was being stripped away, leaving something far more stark and unambiguous. At precisely 5:47 in the morning, the decision was made. The statement would be released. What followed was a moment that would fundamentally alter the relationship between the British royal family and the Duchess of Sussex, and perhaps more devastatingly, between two brothers who had once been inseparable. The announcement itself was brief but unmistakable in its meaning. The royal household would no longer engage with Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, in any official capacity. There was no elaboration, no explanation provided to the public, no softening of the message. For an institution known for its careful diplomacy and measured responses, the directness was jarring. Royal watchers and commentators immediately recognized this as something unprecedented. The palace does not typically make such categorical statements about family members, even those who have stepped back from official duties. Within minutes of the statement going live, the palace website experienced technical difficulties due to the sheer volume of traffic. News organizations around the world scrambled to understand what had prompted such a dramatic announcement. Social media erupted with speculation, analysis, and heated debate. Yet inside Buckingham Palace, according to staff members who were present, there was an eerie calm. It was as if everyone who worked there had been anticipating this moment, had seen it coming even if they could not have predicted the exact timing or wording. The statement represented more than just an administrative decision about who the palace would or would not work with. It represented a line being drawn, a boundary being established that had not existed before. For years, the relationship between the palace and the Sussexes had been complicated, marked by public interviews, documentaries, and increasingly pointed criticisms of the institution. There had been attempts at reconciliation, private conversations, and efforts to find common ground. But this announcement suggested that those efforts had reached their end point. What makes this moment particularly significant is who made the decision. Prince William has long been characterized as the measured one, the brother who thinks before acting, who weighs consequences and considers the long-term implications of his choices. He's often described as being deeply conscious of his future role and the responsibilities that come with it. For him to take such a decisive and public step suggests that something had fundamentally shifted, that a threshold had been crossed from which there was no return. Those who know William describe him as someone who feels the weight of duty intensely. He grew up watching his grandmother navigate decades of challenges to the monarchy, understanding from a young age that personal feelings sometimes have to be subordinated to institutional necessity. His mother, Princess Diana, taught him about compassion and connecting with people on a human level. The tension between these two influences has shaped much of his adult life. But this decision seemed to come down firmly on one side of that equation. The institution had to be protected, even at great personal cost. Across the Atlantic Ocean in California, Prince Harry received the news. The details of his immediate reaction remain private, but those close to the situation suggest it was a moment of profound shock and hurt. The statement was not just about his wife. It was about him, about the choices he had made, about the path he had chosen. For years, Harry had been trying to navigate an impossible situation, wanting to support his wife while also maintaining some connection to his family and the institution he had been born into. This announcement made clear that the palace, or at least his brother, no longer saw that balance as tenable. The timing of the announcement also carried significance. It came after years of escalating tensions, after multiple high-profile interviews, after a documentary series, after a memoir. It came at a point when it seemed every private family matter was being discussed in public forums. The palace had maintained its traditional stance of never complaining and never explaining. But that silence had become increasingly difficult to maintain as one side of the story dominated headlines and shaped public perception. What the public saw was a brief statement. What the palace experienced was the culmination of years of private frustration, documented concerns, and internal debates about how to handle a situation that had no obvious precedent. The British royal family has weathered many storms over the centuries, from abdications to divorces to scandals of various kinds. But this was different. This was a family conflict playing out in real time on a global stage, with social media amplifying every how sent. Development and public opinion splitting into fierce camps. The statement also represented a gamble. By taking such a definitive stance, William was betting that the institution could weather the criticism that would inevitably follow. He was accepting that some portion of the public would see this as proof of everything Meghan had said about the coldness and rigidity of the royal family. He was acknowledging that this decision might permanently damage his relationship with his brother. But apparently he had concluded that the alternative, continuing to try to accommodate a situation he viewed as untenable, posed a greater risk to the monarchy itself. In the hours and days following the announcement, reaction was swift and polarized. Some praised William for taking a stand and protecting the institution. Others condemned what they saw as a cruel and unnecessary rejection of a family member. The debate raged across newspapers, television programs, and social media platforms. Everyone seemed to have an opinion about who was right and who was wrong, who was the victim and who was the villain. But perhaps the most important reaction was the one that happened in private, in a phone call between two brothers whose relationship had already been severely strained. That conversation, the details of which would later become a matter of public controversy, marked another point of rupture in a family that was already deeply divided. Whatever was said in that call, it did not lead to reconciliation. Instead, it seemed to confirm that the distance between William and Harry had become a chasm that might never be bridged. The decision to issue such a stark and unprecedented statement did not come from a single moment of anger or frustration. Rather, it emerged from a pattern of concerns that had been building within the palace for years. Those familiar with the internal workings of the royal household suggest that William had been receiving reports and observing situations that gradually built into a picture he could no longer ignore. The question that many have asked is what specifically could have pushed someone known for his measured approach to take such a drastic step. According to sources within palace circles, one of the key turning points came through official channels rather than gossip or speculation. Royal security conducted an internal review as part of their standard protocols, examining communications and information flow within the household. What they found was concerning enough to warrant a formal report. The document outlined what appeared to be a pattern of information leaks, instances where private conversations and internal discussions seemed to find their way into media coverage with remarkable accuracy and speed. The review identified multiple occasions where details from confidential meetings appeared almost verbatim in news articles, particularly in American media outlets. There were cases of internal correspondence that seemed to have been shared beyond their intended recipients. The timeline of these incidents stretched back to the early months of Meghan's time within the royal family, suggesting this was not a recent development, but rather something that had been occurring for quite some time. What made these findings particularly troubling was not just the fact of the leaks themselves, but the pattern they revealed. The information that made its way to the press was often selective, framed in ways that shaped a particular narrative. Private disputes became public controversies. Internal disagreements were repackaged as institutional failures. Personal conflicts were presented as evidence of systemic problems within the monarchy. Yet even with this security report in hand, William did not immediately act. Those who know him say he spent considerable time trying to understand the situation fully, trying to give the benefit of the doubt, trying to find explanations that did not lead to the conclusion he was beginning to fear. He consulted with advisors, reviewed the evidence repeatedly, and sought additional context. This was not someone looking for reasons to take action, but rather someone hoping to find reasons not to. The situation became more serious with the compilation of what palace insiders refer to as an internal file. This was not a single document, but rather a collection of reports, testimonies, and documented incidents that had been gathered over an extended period. The file began modestly, with notes from staff members about unusual situations or departures from normal protocol. Initially, these were treated as isolated incidents, the kind of minor friction that might be expected when someone new joins an established institution with its own particular ways of doing things. However, as time went on, the notes accumulated into something more substantial. Staff members reported feeling unsure about how to handle certain situations, describing instances where they felt caught between conflicting instructions or uncertain about proper procedures. There were accounts of communications that bypassed normal channels, of conversations that staff members were asked not to document or share with their usual supervisors. What elevated these concerns from administrative issues to something more serious was a section of the file that dealt with the psychological and emotional impact on palace employees. This was not speculation or gossip, but rather a formal assessment conducted by human resources professionals as part of their duty of care to staff members. The assessment was based on anonymous testimonies and confidential interviews, designed to protect those who came forward while still gathering accurate information about the working environment. The findings painted a troubling picture. Multiple staff members described feeling destabilized in their roles. They reported confusion about expectations, pressure that seemed disproportionate to the situations at hand, and a sense of walking on eggshells. Some described instances where they would leave meetings feeling disoriented or questioning their own recollection of events. Others mentioned feeling guilty or fearful after interactions, even when they could not clearly identify what they had done wrong. Particularly concerning were accounts of a pattern where challenges or questions would be reframed in ways that made staff members feel they were being culturally insensitive or prejudiced, even in situations that appeared to have nothing to do with culture or race. This created an environment where people became reluctant to raise legitimate concerns or questions, afraid that doing so would mark them as problematic or biased. The term that appeared in the assessment, though carefully worded, suggested what mental health professionals would recognize as gaslighting. This is a form of psychological manipulation where someone is made to question their own perception of reality, their own memory, their own judgment. When this happens repeatedly in a professional setting, it can create an atmosphere of chronic stress and uncertainty that affects not just individual employees, but the functioning of the entire organization. When William reviewed this material, according to those close to him, he spent hours in silence processing what he was reading. This was not abstract criticism or media speculation. These were documented accounts from people whose job was to serve the royal family, people who had no obvious motivation to fabricate problems. The weight of the evidence made it increasingly difficult to dismiss the concerns as misunderstandings or growing pains. But perhaps what made the situation most painful for William was the implication it carried about his brother. The reports suggested that Harry, whether knowingly or unknowingly, had allowed sensitive information to slip beyond the boundaries of palace confidentiality. There was no suggestion that Harry was malicious in this, but rather that he had perhaps been reckless, not fully appreciating the consequences of sharing certain information or not adequately safeguarding private communications. For William, this represented a betrayal of a different kind. He had spent years protecting his younger brother, shielding him from criticism, defending his choices both publicly and privately. He had understood Harry's struggles with royal life, his desire for more privacy, his frustration with media intrusion. William had been supportive when Harry met Meghan, hopeful that she might bring his brother happiness. But now he was confronted with evidence that his protection and support had been met with actions that undermined the very institution they were both raised to serve. Throughout this period, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, played a role that has only recently come to fuller public understanding. While she maintained her characteristic public composure and grace, behind palace doors she was observing, documenting, and eventually providing crucial support to her husband as he wrestled with an impossible situation. Catherine had begun noticing tensions early on, subtle signs that things were not quite right. During joint public engagements, she observed interactions that seemed off, moments of tension that did not match the smiling photographs. She noticed comments made when cameras were turned away, shifts in atmosphere that others might have missed. But Catherine did not immediately raise alarms or confront anyone. Instead, she watched carefully and made mental notes. One particular moment stayed with her, a comment made during what should have been a routine gathering. The words themselves might have seemed innocuous to someone else, but to Catherine, they revealed an attitude that concerned her deeply. It suggested a view of public relations and media management that was fundamentally at odds with how the royal family traditionally operates. More than that, it hinted at an understanding of power dynamics that seemed designed to create leverage rather than harmony. From that point forward, Catherine began keeping more detailed observations. She did this not out of antagonism, but out of protection, both for the institution and for her husband. She could see that William was being pulled in multiple directions, trying to be a supportive brother, while also recognizing that something was seriously wrong. She watched him become emotionally exhausted from the effort of trying to hold everything together. Catherine's notes, kept privately and shared only when necessary, eventually contributed to the psychological assessment that became part of the internal file. Her observations were precise and factual, avoiding exaggeration or emotional interpretation. She simply recorded what she saw and heard, trusting that the pattern would speak for itself. But her influence extended beyond documentation. As William struggled with the weight of the evidence before him, Catherine provided clarity when emotion threatened to cloud his judgment. She reminded him of his responsibilities, not just to his family, but to the future of the monarchy. She helped him see that trying to save everyone often meant saving no one, and that sometimes the most difficult decisions are also the most necessary ones. It was Catherine who helped William understand that his silence in the face of mounting evidence was itself a choice, one that was allowing a particular narrative to dominate while the institution he would one day lead was being undermined. She did not push him toward cruelty or vindictiveness, but toward decisiveness and clarity. When he finally made the decision to issue the statement, her support was quiet but absolute, a reminder that he was not alone in carrying this burden. In the aftermath of William's announcement, there was one conversation that needed to happen. One final exchange between two brothers whose relationship had already been strained to breaking point. The phone call that followed would become the subject of much speculation and, eventually, public controversy. Those who have heard accounts of what transpired describe it as one of the most emotionally devastating moments in the recent history of the royal family. The call began with silence. Not the comfortable silence of two people who know each other well, but the heavy, suffocating silence of two people who no longer know how to speak to one another. When Harry finally found his voice, it was shaking with a mixture of disbelief and desperation. He asked what was happening, though the answer was already clear. William's response was brief and definitive. He told his brother that he already knew what was happening, that there was no mystery here, no misunderstanding that needed to be cleared up. What followed was Harry's attempt to plead his case, to ask for time, to request understanding. He insisted that Meghan had been misunderstood by the palace, misrepresented in the media, and mistreated by an institution that never truly gave her a chance. His words carried the weight of years of frustration and the pain of watching his wife struggle with circumstances he felt powerless to change. He spoke as a husband defending his partner, as someone who believed that loyalty to family meant standing by the person you chose to build a life with. William's counter-arguments were measured but firm. He pointed out that Meghan had not simply been misunderstood, but had actively shaped narratives, turned private family matters into public controversies, and weaponized public sympathy in ways that damaged the institution. He spoke not with anger, but with a kind of cold precision, laying out his case point by point. This was not an emotional outburst, but rather the culmination of careful thought and painful deliberation. The conversation deteriorated as Harry's frustration grew. He felt that his brother was punishing Meghan for speaking her truth, for refusing to suffer in silence the way others in the family had done. He saw William's actions as proof of everything Meghan had said about the rigidity and coldness of the royal institution, about its inability to adapt or show compassion to those who did not fit its traditional mold. William's response cut deeper than any raised voice could have. He made a distinction that Harry seemed unable or unwilling to accept. There was her truth, he said, and then there was the truth, and they were not the same thing. More devastating still was his observation that Meghan had not just divided the family, but had divided Harry from himself, had created distance between the person Harry had been and the person he had become. Those words landed with crushing weight. Harry's response was barely audible, a cracked breath that spoke of pain too deep for articulation. But William was not finished. He continued, speaking about the undermining of the crown, the manipulation of the institution, the threat to its stability. These were not just family matters anymore, he argued. They had become matters of constitutional and historical significance. Harry's anger finally erupted. He suggested that perhaps the institution deserved to be shaken, that maybe there was something fundamentally wrong with a system that caused so much pain to the people within it. This was not just about Meghan anymore. This was about everything Harry had experienced, every restriction he had chafed against, every sacrifice he had been asked to make for an institution he never asked to be born into. William's response was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of their entire shared history. He invoked their mother, suggesting that Diana would not have wanted things to unfold this way. It was a low blow, perhaps, or perhaps it was the only truth that mattered. Either way, Harry's reaction was immediate and raw. He told William that he had no right to use their mother in this argument, that he could not claim to know what she would have wanted. What followed was the sound of decades of brotherhood dissolving. All the shared memories, the private jokes, the mutual understanding born of unique, shared trauma, all of it seemed to evaporate in that moment. They were no longer two brothers trying to find common ground. They were two men on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide, each convinced of their own righteousness, each unable to see the other's perspective. The end of the conversation came with a kind of terrible clarity. Harry issued what amounted to an ultimatum. If William went through with the public statement, he would lose Harry. The implication was clear. This was not just about a professional announcement. This was about their relationship as brothers, about whether any bond remained that was worth preserving. William's response was immediate. He said he knew. 2 words that contained everything. He knew what he was sacrificing. He knew what the cost would be, and he was willing to pay for it. The phone call ended with a click that echoed far beyond the immediate moment. A sound that marked the end of a relationship that had survived their mother's death, years of intense media scrutiny, and countless other challenges. But the story did not end with that phone call. In fact, in some ways it was only beginning. Because while William and Harry were having their final conversation, Meghan was already several steps ahead, planning her response to the palace announcement with the kind of strategic precision that had characterized much of her approach to her royal experience. Those close to Meghan describe her reaction to William's statement not as panic or shock, but as calculated assessment. She sat in her California home, reading the announcement on her phone, processing it not as a personal attack but as a chess move that required a countermove. This was not someone caught off guard. This was someone who had been preparing for various scenarios, understanding that her relationship with the palace was heading towards some kind of rupture. Within hours, her team was assembled. Publicists, brand strategists, legal advisors, and media consultants gathered to plan the response. But the strategy they developed was subtle. They would not respond immediately, which would look defensive and reactive. Instead, they would create a carefully managed silence that could be interpreted as dignified restraint, as someone taking the high road in the face of institutional cruelty. The first move came through surrogates. A close friend provided a statement to a major American media outlet, describing Meghan as devastated and expressing disappointment that William had not shown more compassion. The statement never directly attacked William or the palace. It did not need to. The implication was clear enough. Here was a woman who had hoped for understanding and instead received rejection, cut off from a family she had tried to be part of. The next elements of the strategy unfolded over subsequent weeks. There were carefully timed leaks about potential projects, suggestions that Meghan was being courted for documentaries or other media opportunities that would allow her to tell her story more fully. Whether these opportunities were real or manufactured for strategic purposes was almost beside the point. The message was clear. If the palace wanted to silence her, she had other platforms, bigger platforms, that would amplify her voice. Then came the podcast episode, released with timing that seemed almost too perfect to be coincidental. Meghan spoke in language that was beautifully vulnerable, yet strategically pointed. She talked about speaking your truth and about how those closest to you are often the ones who try to silence you first. She never named names. She never made direct accusations. But anyone following the story knew exactly what she was talking about. Perhaps most damaging was what came next. Private correspondence began appearing in media outlets, letters that detailed Meghan's emotional state during her time in the palace, her feelings of isolation, and her struggles with the constraints of royal life. Meghan denied being the source of these leaks, and there was no definitive proof either way. But the effect was undeniable. Public sympathy, which had been divided, began swinging back in her direction. Then came the development that sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace. Excerpts from the private phone call between William and Harry appeared in the press. Not the full conversation, but carefully selected quotes that painted a particular picture. William came across as cold and unyielding. Harry seemed heartbroken and desperate. And implicitly, Meghan was positioned as the victim at the center of a family drama not of her making. The question of how those quotes became public consumed the palace. Security teams were brought in to investigate. Digital forensics experts examined communication systems. There were only a few possible explanations, each more troubling than the last. Had Harry recorded the call, perhaps out of fear that William would later deny what was said? Had Meghan been present and captured the conversation, seeing it as insurance or potential leverage? Was there a compromise device suggesting that someone outside the immediate family had access to their private communications? Or was there an insider, someone within the palace itself who wanted to see the conflict escalate? The investigation yielded no definitive answers, but it revealed something perhaps more disturbing. The leak had not been random. The quotes had been curated, selected specifically to maximize emotional impact and drive a wedge even deeper between the brothers. This was not an accidental breach of privacy. This was a deliberate tactical move in what had become an all-out war for public opinion and narrative control. William's reaction to seeing his private words in the newspapers was telling. He did not rage or immediately seek revenge. Instead, he went quiet for a long moment before observing that the leak was not designed to shame him personally. It was designed to destroy them all, to ensure that reconciliation became impossible, to guarantee that the conflict would continue to escalate. As the dust began to settle from the initial explosion of William's announcement and the subsequent revelations, the world found itself divided into camps, each certain of their moral position. The debate that followed was not simply about palace politics or family drama. It became a broader conversation about duty versus personal happiness, tradition versus modernity, and the role of ancient institutions in contemporary society. Those who supported William's decision argued from a position of institutional necessity. They pointed to the internal documentation, the staff testimonies, the pattern of leaks, and strategic media manipulation. From this perspective, William was not acting out of cruelty or vindictiveness, but out of responsibility. He had a duty to protect not just his family, but an institution that represents continuity and stability for millions of people across the Commonwealth. The monarchy, they argued, cannot function if it is constantly undermined from within, if private conversations become public fodder, if every internal disagreement becomes a global controversy. These supporters saw William as someone who had tried every alternative before arriving at this difficult decision. He had defended Meghan publicly. He had attempted private reconciliation. He had tolerated years of criticism and watched as the institution he will one day lead was portrayed in increasingly negative terms. The announcement, from this view, was not the beginning of hostility, but the end of patience, a necessary boundary drawn after all other options had been exhausted. On the other side were those who saw William's action as confirmation of everything Meghan had claimed about the royal family. They argued that the announcement proved the institution was indeed cold, rigid, and unwilling to accommodate anyone who challenged its traditional ways of operating. Meghan had spoken about feeling isolated, about experiencing racism and lack of support, about an institution that prioritized image over the well-being of the people within it. And now, they argued, here was proof. A woman who dared to speak out was being cut off, excluded, treated as a threat rather than a family member who deserved understanding and support. From this perspective, William was not protecting the monarchy, but rather protecting a broken system that needed to be reformed or perhaps dismantled entirely. His decision to issue such a stark statement was seen as an act of institutional self-preservation at the expense of human compassion. They pointed out that Meghan had tried to adapt, had sought help when struggling, and had ultimately been forced to choose between her mental health and her role within the family. That she was now being formally excluded seemed to validate every criticism she had made. Yet perhaps the most honest assessment is that both sides hold pieces of the truth, and both are blind to their own biases. It's entirely possible that Meghan did experience genuine isolation, cultural clashes, and unfair scrutiny, while also engaging in strategic narrative management and boundary-crossing behavior. These things are not mutually exclusive. A person can be both victim and manipulator, both wronged and wrong in their response. Similarly, William can have genuinely tried to protect his family and the institution while also acting with a calculated coldness when he felt cornered. His decision may have been necessary from an institutional perspective while still being devastating from a human one. The fact that a choice is difficult does not automatically make it right, but neither does it make it wrong. What complicates this situation further is the position of King Charles, a father watching his two sons drift apart while wearing a crown he waited 70 years to inherit. Charles has always been someone who understood both tradition and the need for evolution. He experienced his own struggles with royal expectations, endured a painful and public marriage breakdown, and spent years being dismissed as irrelevant or out of touch. When Harry began expressing his frustrations with royal life, Charles understood those feelings from personal experience. Palace sources suggest that Charles held multiple private meetings with both sons separately, desperate attempts to find middle ground before the situation became irreversible. The conversations with Harry were reportedly emotional and charged, with Harry pleading his case and defending his wife, asking his father to choose family over institution. Charles's response, heavy with the weight of his position, was that he no longer had the luxury of choosing. He was the institution now, the embodiment of centuries of continuity and tradition. Those conversations apparently left Charles visibly affected. Staff members described him as appearing haunted in the days following these meetings, but his discussions with William were different in character, more strategic and less emotional. William was not asking for sympathy, but for support. And Charles understood that supporting William meant potentially losing Harry forever. The moment when William presented the internal file to his father marked a turning point. Charles reviewed the documentation in complete silence, his expression growing heavier with each page. When he finished, he reportedly told William that he was ready to be king, even if Charles wished he were not. It was an acknowledgement that he could not and would not try to stop what William felt he needed to do. When William's announcement was released to the world, Charles was informed just 30 minutes beforehand. He did not object or attempt to intervene. He simply nodded and returned to his work, to the endless stream of state papers and official duties that define a monarch's existence, because that is what being king requires. You continue, you endure, you survive, even when your family is fracturing around you. But that evening, in a rare moment of vulnerability, Charles reportedly spoke to Camilla about what he was feeling. He expressed what many fathers in his position might feel, the helplessness of being unable to fix what had broken between his sons. Camilla's response captured the tragedy at the heart of this entire situation. She observed that Charles had chosen the crown, William had chosen the crown, and Harry had chosen love. None of them were wrong, and all of them were broken. This observation points to something fundamental about the nature of this conflict. It is not a simple story of heroes and villains. It is a tragedy in the classical sense, where people making understandable choices from their own perspectives inevitably collide in ways that cause immense pain. The institution demands certain sacrifices. Personal happiness sometimes requires rejecting those demands. And when these forces meet, the result is devastation, regardless of who is right. The monarchy that emerges from this crisis is fundamentally changed. It is a royal family without one of its princes, without the possibility of reconciliation that might have seemed possible before. William has been hardened by this experience, becoming sharper and more strategic, less willing to allow emotion to cloud institutional judgment. Catherine has stepped more fully into her role, not just as supportive spouse, but as architect of stability, a figure of dignified strength in ongoing turbulence. For Harry, the distance from the throne is now measured not just in position of succession, but in emotional and geographical miles that seem impossible to cross. The brother he once relied upon has become someone he no longer recognizes, transformed by the weight of future responsibility into something harder and less forgiving. The promise they once made to face the world together, forged in the shared grief of walking behind their mother's coffin, now seems like a relic from a different lifetime. For Meghan, the situation is more complex. She retains a powerful platform and a devoted following. Her narrative of institutional mistreatment resonates with many who see the monarchy as an outdated relic. But William's announcement has placed a permanent shadow over her relationship with the royal family, one that no amount of interviews or documentaries can fully dispel. She will always be the woman who was formally cut off, and that fact will colour everything that follows. The broader question facing the monarchy is whether it can survive in an era where privacy is nearly impossible, where every family conflict becomes global entertainment, where competing narratives battle for dominance in real time across social media platforms. William believes the answer is yes, that the institution can and must remain strong, silent, and unshaken. Not perfect, but unbreakable. Yet there is a cost to unbreakability. Things that cannot bend eventually break in different ways. They lose the capacity for forgiveness, for compromise, for the kind of human messiness that families require to function. The monarchy may survive this crisis institutionally while losing something essential about what makes it human and relatable. History will eventually render its judgment on who was right in this conflict. Historians will debate whether William made the correct decision, whether Meghan was treated fairly, whether Harry chose wisely. But what history cannot restore is what has been lost. Two brothers who survived their mother's death together cannot survive their own choices and the weight of the institution between them. The real tragedy is not about crowns or titles or public perception. It's about two young boys who promised to protect each other, who swore the institution would never consume them the way it consumed their mother, who believed their bond was strong enough to withstand anything. That promise lies shattered now, broken by the collision of duty and love, tradition and modernity, personal happiness and institutional survival. And in the wreckage, everyone involved has lost something irreplaceable, something that no amount of being right can ever restore.